So if the problem is, as I've described it, that we have concentrated the funding of campaigns in a tiny, tiny fraction of the 1%, the solution is to break that concentration up, to decentralize funding of campaigns. Well, when you start talking about decentralization of power, Hayek gets excited in his grave, right? Libertarians get excited. It's about, yes, the problem is concentrated power. And conservatives, too, ought to be skeptical of concentrated power. And if all we're talking about is making it possible for more people to participate in the funding of campaigns, and not worried about, silencing people you don't like participating.
So you can do this without having to pass very sharp restrictions on the ability of super PACs, for example, to operate?
You can and should, and the first thing we must do is to change the way campaigns are funded. That's something we can do with a statute. If we get the right statute passed, whether it's the matching fund proposal, which is modeled in some sense off of the New York City campaign finance proposal, or a voucher proposal, which is what Republicans push, the idea of giving everybody a voucher which they can use to fund campaigns. Either of those, if done right, would radically change the influence that this tiny, tiny fraction of 1% have in our system. Now, in addition to that, I also believe we're going to have to deal with the problem of super PACs. I actually don't think we have to worry about Citizens United. Those are two different issues. Citizens United is the case that says corporations get to spend unlimited amounts of money and unions get to spend unlimited amounts of money.
Because they're people too, and they have speech rights.
That's not what the court said. That's how people explained it.
Okay.
But they get to spend unlimited amounts of money, and therefore the fear we had, I was one of these people who had this fear, was that these corporations were going to spend billions in elections to kind of sweep the field. That decision led the DC Circuit to make one step further, to say that if you could spend unlimited amounts of money, you should be allowed to give unlimited amounts of money to independent political action committees. That's what created the super PAC. Now, the one doesn't follow from the other. And the Supreme Court has never even considered the super PAC decision. It wasn't reviewed by the Supreme Court. And I think it turns out corporations aren't very eager to spend their money directly. I mean, this election cycle, I think it's something like 2% of the money spent was corporate money. And that's because corporations have discovered the high cost of free speech. Target, when it supported an anti-gay candidate in Minnesota, found their stores picketed all across the country. They're not eager to do that. They're not eager to get in the middle of these kind of fights. So I actually think we ultimately don't have to worry about the Citizens United part. It's the super PAC part. And it's not even clear to me it's going to take a constitutional amendment to do it, because I'm increasingly convinced the Supreme Court will eventually fix that mistake. And if it fixes the mistake and says there can't be super PACs, there can be independent political action committees, but the amount you contribute is limited, then I think 95% of the problem is the way we fund campaigns. That's the fight we need to be having. Now again, we progressively liberals are seems to me, fighting the wrong fight. Because if you look out there, all the energy out there is people pushing for constitutional amendments that say corporations are not persons and money is not speech. Two changes that actually wouldn't address anything that I'm talking about here. Like, that wouldn't change the way elections are funded if you declare corporations not persons or money is not speech. And the other thing that does is it convinces everybody the only way to solve this problem is to amend the Constitution, and most people think it's impossible to amend the Constitution. So you reinforce the impossibility assumption with a solution that wouldn't even be a solution, which is why I work as hard as I can to push the conversation away from the constitutional issue and focus it back on what is the core problem. The core problem is the way we fund campaigns. And we ought to do what every other democracy does, which is to find a way to fund campaigns that doesn't exacerbate the natural desire of the elite to exercise enormous power inside the political system.